My parents are furious I didn't consult them about buying my house. But the truth is, they never planned for me to have a future at all. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 27, and I grew up in a small town in Ohio. From as far back as I can remember, my parents, Linda and Frank, made it clear who their favorite child was. My younger sister, Megan, 2 years younger than me, was the star of the family. Everything she wanted, she got. Everything she dreamed of, my parents made happen. When Megan wanted to join dance lessons, they signed her up and bought her the nicest costume. When I asked to join a writing club, they said it was a waste of time and told me to focus on chores. When Megan mentioned she wanted to go to college out of state, they proudly opened the college fund and paid every cent. I wasn't even offered that option. I had to work part-time through high school and give up on the idea of help with tuition. It wasn't just money. It was attention, love, and respect. Megan got expensive gifts on birthdays and holidays, while mine were cheap and thoughtless. She was praised for the smallest achievements, while I could break my back working and hear nothing but silence. As I got older, I realized it wasn't going to change. My parents had decided that Megan was their future, and I was the backup, someone who would always be around to support, but never shine. I won't lie, it hurt. Watching your own family treat you like you're less important than your sibling feels like being erased while still standing in the room. But instead of falling apart, I decided to take care of myself. I worked 2 jobs after high school, one as a receptionist during the day and another waiting tables at night. I saved every dollar I could. It wasn't glamorous. Some nights I was so exhausted I could barely crawl into bed. But each paycheck meant freedom, and that's what kept me going. Meanwhile, Megan's life was all laid out for her. My parents were already saving for her wedding before she even had a serious boyfriend. They bragged about her to neighbors, relatives, anyone who would listen. I was mentioned only as an afterthought. Emily's doing fine, she's working. Never with pride, never with warmth. It took years, but slowly my dreams started coming together. While my parents assumed I would rent forever, I was building a life they didn't know about. I stayed quiet, never telling them about my savings, never asking for advice. I learned to keep things to myself, because in my family, sharing only meant someone else would take it. Finally, after years of sacrifice, I signed the papers for my very first house. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it was mine. My name was on that deed, not Megan's, not my parents'. For the first time, I felt like I had carved out something they couldn't touch. That was the moment everything began to unravel. I couldn't wait to share the news. After years of hard work, I finally had something to be proud of, something no one could take away. So I called my parents and asked them to come over. When they arrived, I greeted them at the front door with the widest smile I'd worn in years. "Welcome to my new home," I said, almost bursting with joy. They stepped inside, looked around, and for a moment I thought I might hear something kind. But instead of happiness, I saw confusion spread across their faces. My dad crossed his arms, glancing at my mom, and finally spoke. "Why didn't you talk to us before making a decision like that?" His tone wasn't excitement, it was disappointment, even irritation. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. "Because it's my house, Dad. I wanted to surprise you." But my mom's face hardened. "You don't just buy property without consulting your family. You should have asked us first." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had dreamed of this moment, imagined their pride, maybe even a hug. Instead, they looked at me like I had done something wrong. "Consult you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I worked for this. Why would I need your approval?" My mom exchanged a glance with my dad, then sighed. "Because we already had plans, Emily. This was supposed to be Megan, the family's first house. We've been preparing for her and Jason to move into it once they're married." I froze, the joy I'd felt draining out of me. "Excuse me? You're saying you thought Megan and her fiancé would live here? This is my house. I bought it." Dad stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp. "That's exactly why you should have waited. We expected you to keep renting. It made sense for Megan to have the first home. You don't even have a family yet." "She does." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All this time, while I'd been struggling, they had already mapped out my sister's future. My achievement wasn't even acknowledged. It was treated like a mistake. "Do you even hear yourselves?" I said quietly. "I sacrificed everything to make this happen, and your only concern is that Megan didn't get it handed to her." Mom's jaw tightened. "Don't twist this. We're looking out for the family. Megan and Jason need stability. You could have waited. You've always been fine in apartments." Their words sank like stones. To them, it didn't matter how hard I'd worked. It didn't matter that I'd earned every cent. They still saw me as someone who should step aside so my sister could have it all. I looked around at the walls, the floor, the keys still heavy in my pocket. This was mine. And in that moment, I realized they weren't here to celebrate me. They were here to remind me I'd never been part of their plan. I spent the night replaying their words in my head, trying to understand how they could so easily dismiss everything I had achieved. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. Something had been bothering me for years, and now I couldn't ignore it anymore. Back when I was a teenager, my parents had promised both Megan and me a college fund. I'd assumed mine had disappeared because times were hard, or maybe because of bad investments. But something about the way they spoke yesterday made me wonder if there was more to it. I drove to the bank where I had opened my first savings account. The woman at the desk pulled up old records, and with each page she handed me, my stomach twisted tighter. There it was in black and white, withdrawals I never made, transactions signed off by my parents when I was barely out of high school. Large sums had been taken from the account that was supposed to secure my education. I asked the teller if she could confirm where the money went. She showed me the transfers, and Megan's college payments were listed clear as day. My hands shook as I folded the papers. All these years, I thought I simply didn't deserve the same chances my sister got. But the truth was worse. They had stolen from me. That evening, I drove to their house. My mom was in the kitchen when I walked in, humming like nothing had happened. I laid the bank documents on the table. Care to explain this? I asked. She barely glanced at the papers before pushing them aside. You're overreacting. Overreacting? My voice cracked. You drained my fund to pay for Megan's tuition. You took my future and handed it to her. Her expression hardened, all sweetness gone. We did what we had to do. It was for the better child, the one who'll carry the family name with pride. The words sliced through me. Better child. She didn't even hesitate to say it out loud. My dad walked in, saw the scene, and simply muttered, "No use digging up the past. What's done is done." I stared at them both, waiting for any sign of guilt or regret, but there was nothing. They were calm, almost smug, like this betrayal was perfectly reasonable. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought about the nights I stayed up late working shifts, the exhaustion, the constant worry about money. They had watched me struggle and never once admitted they were the reason why. I gathered the papers, my hands steady now. You may have stolen my education, I said quietly, but you won't touch my house. Not this time. Their silence followed me out the door. My chest was heavy, but beneath the pain, something fierce had taken root. They had taken enough from me already, and I wasn't about to let them win again. A week later, I got a call from Megan. She sounded cheerful, almost overly so, and asked if she and Jason could stop by to see the place. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Part of me still wanted a normal relationship with my sister, even if my parents had made that impossible. When they arrived, Megan walked through the front door like she already owned it. Jason followed behind, polite but clearly taking cues from her. She ran her hand along the banister, peeked into rooms, and smiled as though she were inspecting something she'd soon possess. "This is so nice, Em," she said, drawing out the words. "You've done well for yourself." I thanked her, though something in her tone felt off, like praise wrapped in condescension. Jason nodded in agreement, complimenting the kitchen. For a moment, it almost felt like we could enjoy this visit without conflict. Then, without warning, Megan leaned against the counter and said, "So, Mom and Dad mentioned you'd let us move in once we're married. This place is perfect for us." Her words knocked the air out of me. I stared at her, wondering if I had heard right. Jason smiled, clearly thinking this was already settled. I swallowed hard. "What are you talking about?" Megan tilted her head, confused by my reaction. "They said you understood. That this house would work better for us starting a family. You don't need all this space." The realization hit like a punch. My parents had told her the same story they'd told me, that my role was temporary, that this house was never meant to be mine. Only this time Megan believed it. I straightened, my voice firmer than I expected. "No. I bought this place for me. My name is on the deed. It isn't yours. It isn't theirs. It's mine." Her face flushed. "You can't be serious. You'd really keep all of this for yourself when you know Jason, and I need it more." Jason shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing her arm as though to calm her down, but she pulled away. "You're being selfish, Emily," she snapped. "I thought you'd finally do something right for the family. But of course, you only ever think about yourself." I clenched my fists but refused to waver. If wanting to keep the home I worked for makes me selfish, then fine. Call me whatever you want. But you're not moving in here. Megan's eyes narrowed, fury flashing across her face. Without another word, she grabbed Jason's hand and stormed out, her heels pounding against the floor. Jason gave me a quick, uneasy glance before following her out the door. When the silence settled, I sat on the couch, heart racing. The message was clear. My parents hadn't just stolen from me, they had promised my life to someone else. And now, I had drawn a line they could never cross. The fallout came quicker than I expected. It started with short, clipped phone calls from aunts and uncles who rarely reached out. Each conversation carried the same sharp edge, like they already had their minds made up before I even spoke. Words like ungrateful and self-centered were dropped casually, their voices heavy with judgment. I didn't need to ask where it came from. I knew my parents were behind it. Soon after, I was invited to a family dinner at my uncle's house. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see just how far my parents were willing to go. When I arrived, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Normally, dinners were full of chatter and laughter, but that evening, the room fell quiet when I walked in. All eyes shifted toward me. We sat around the long dining table, plates filled, glasses clinking. I tried to keep my head down, but it didn't take long. My aunt leaned forward, her fork clattering against the plate. "Emily, how could you do this to Megan? Everyone knows that house was supposed to be for her. Don't you care about your family at all?" My cousin chimed in, shaking his head. "Yeah, it's pretty cold to pull the rug out from under your own sister. She's starting a family. You're just what? Living alone." The words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. I glanced at my parents across the table. My mother sat with her chin lifted proudly, while my father avoided my eyes, busying himself with his food. They didn't need to speak. Their silence told me everything. They had painted me as the villain, and the family had eaten it up. I could have defended myself. I could have shouted, told them about the stolen college fund, the years of neglect, the truth behind every sacrifice. But I didn't. Instead, I let the accusations wash over me like cold rain. I smiled politely, answered with short, measured responses, and refused to give them the satisfaction of watching me unravel. Inside, though, something shifted. I realized I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation, their pity, or their skewed version of love. They could twist the story however they liked. I knew the truth. And I also knew the best revenge wouldn't come from screaming or fighting. It would come from living a life so solid, so undeniably mine, that their lies couldn't touch it. So I sat there, letting them call me heartless, ungrateful, selfish. I nodded, smiled, and ate my dinner in silence. But while they whispered about my supposed betrayal, I was already plotting my quiet rebellion. Not through arguments, not through confrontation, but through independence, through building something that couldn't be stolen or twisted. If they wanted to cast me as the villain, I would let them, because I had finally discovered the one thing they couldn't control, my future. After that dinner, I made a decision. The next time my phone lit up with my parents' names, I let it ring. And the time after that. Eventually, their calls blurred into background noise, voicemails piling up with the same tired message about needing to sit down and talk about the house. I stopped replying to texts altogether. If they wanted to argue, they'd have to do it without me. The silence gave me space to breathe. For the first time, I could wake up without bracing myself for their disapproval. Instead of chasing their approval, I poured my energy into the one thing that was truly mine. The house wasn't perfect when I bought it. The walls were dull, the garden overgrown, the floors scratched and worn. But those flaws became my project. Every evening after work, I pulled on old jeans and got to work sanding, painting, scrubbing. On weekends, I tackled bigger jobs, hauling out broken furniture, planting flowers out front, learning how to fix what I couldn't afford to replace. Slowly, the place transformed. I loved the smell of fresh paint in the mornings, the sight of sunlight falling across the new hardwood I'd polished myself. Each nail hammered in, each brushstroke across a wall, felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I never thought I'd have. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that I could build a life without permission, without their hand guiding or taking. But even as I pulled away, my parents didn't stop trying to drag me back. A letter arrived one afternoon, written in my mother's precise handwriting. It wasn't an apology. It was a plea masked as logic. She wrote about Megan and Jason, about how they needed stability as they prepared for marriage, about how a home should be given to the child with the greater need. She insisted I should think of the family first, not myself. I tore the letter in half and dropped it in the trash. A week later, my father showed up at the door. He didn't come inside. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, and repeated the same script. Megan was starting a new chapter. She deserved the house more. I could always find another place. His voice carried that practiced calm, the kind meant to sound reasonable while pushing me into submission. I listened without a word, then closed the door. Inside, the silence felt heavier, but also stronger. I leaned against the freshly painted wall and let the quiet sink in. For once, I wasn't the girl desperate for scraps of approval. I was the woman who had drawn a line and refused to let it be crossed. They could keep knocking, keep calling, keep insisting Megan's needs outweighed mine. But the house stood solid around me, built on my sweat, not their choices. And no matter how hard they tried, I wasn't going to hand it over. One evening after a long shift, I pulled into the driveway, looking forward to nothing more than a hot shower and a quiet meal. As I unlocked the front door, I heard voices inside, loud, animated voices. My stomach dropped. I hadn't given anyone a key. I pushed the door open and froze. My parents stood in the living room with Megan and Jason, a tape measure stretched across the wall. Megan was pointing toward the corner, talking about where a crib would go, while Jason scribbled notes on a pad. My mom was nodding approvingly, and my dad paced the room, muttering about tearing out a wall to make more space. For a second, I couldn't move. They didn't even notice me at first, so wrapped up in their plans. Finally, Megan spotted me and smiled smugly. Perfect timing. We were just figuring out the nursery. The shock burned away into pure fury. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I demanded. My father straightened up, frowning like I was the intruder. "We're discussing renovations. You'll thank us later when the place is set up properly for them. Not me." Not once had my name entered the conversation. I marched into the room, ripping the notepad out of Jason's hand. "Get out. All of you. Right now." Megan rolled her eyes, arms crossed. "You're overreacting," Mom and Dad said. "I don't care what they said." My voice cracked through the room like a whip. "This is my home. You don't get to walk in here and plan a future that doesn't belong to you." Silence followed, heavy and cold. My mother's face tightened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're being dramatic, Emily. We're trying to help. You've always been difficult, but this is cruel." "Cruel?" I laughed bitterly. "Cruel is stealing from me. Cruel is standing in my house and deciding it belongs to someone else. I've had enough. You will never control me again." The anger I had swallowed for years finally erupted. My hands trembled, but my voice held steady. "This house is mine. Not yours. Not Megan's. Mine. Get out before I call the police." Jason shifted uncomfortably, mumbling something about leaving. But Megan dug her heels in. "You'll regret this, Emily. You can't just cut out your family." That was when my father spoke, his words calm but sharp as knives. "If you walk away from us, you're no longer our daughter. You're dead to the family." The room spun, but I refused to flinch. I opened the front door wide. "Then I guess you've buried me already. Now get out." One by one, they filed past me, faces twisted with anger and disbelief. When the door finally shut, the silence roared in my ears. I leaned against it, breathing hard, my heart pounding, but I felt lighter than I ever had before. They had cast me out, but in truth, I had freed myself. The seasons changed, and with them, the storm around me seemed to quiet. My phone no longer lit up with calls from my parents, and word from extended relatives trickled down to almost nothing. I poured myself into work and into my home, until one afternoon a co-worker leaned across the break room table and said, "Did you hear about Megan?" I shook my head cautiously. She and Jason called it off. The words settled like ash in the air. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I didn't reach out directly, but whispers came easily in a town like ours. The story unfolded piece by piece. Jason had discovered Megan wasn't faithful. Not just once, but repeatedly. Texts, late-night messages, excuses that didn't add up. Eventually, he'd had enough. Their engagement dissolved overnight. The lavish ceremony my parents had been boasting about for months vanished with, but the costs didn't disappear. Deposits on the venue, catering, dresses, it had all been paid up front. My parents had sunk their savings into a dream they never questioned, convinced their chosen daughter deserved everything. Now that dream sat in shambles, and the bills remained. Neighbors whispered about unpaid debts, about my father taking out loans he couldn't afford, about my mother selling jewelry to cover balance. The family that once paraded Megan's future as the crown jewel now walked around town with forced smiles and empty pockets. And Megan herself? She came crashing down harder than anyone expected. Without Jason's support, she was left alone. She had quit her job months earlier, planning to step into married life without the burden of work. With no income, she had nowhere to go but back to the house she grew up in. People said they saw her through the windows late at night, pacing rooms she used to decorate with college posters. The golden child, the one my parents swore would carry the family name with pride, was reduced to living under their roof again, jobless and bitter. I heard all this secondhand, yet every detail struck me with a strange mix of sorrow and vindication. Part of me pitied her, because betrayal hurts no matter who you are. But another part of me couldn't ignore the irony. For years, I had been pushed aside so she could shine, and now, after all the sacrifices made in her name, the spotlight had burned her. My parents had gambled everything on one daughter. They had dismissed me, stolen from me, lied to me, all to build a future for her. And now they were drowning in debt, stuck caring for the very person they had lifted above all else. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. But when I closed my door at night, standing in the home they once tried to give away, I felt a quiet sense of justice. Their downfall had nothing to do with me. It was the weight of their own choices finally crushing them. It started with a knock at my door on a Sunday afternoon. I peeked through the window and saw my parents standing there, shoulders slumped, faces drawn in ways I hadn't seen before. For a moment, I considered ignoring them, but something in their persistence made me open the door. My mother stepped forward first. Her tone softened to something almost sweet. Emily, we've been thinking. Families go through rough patches, but in the end, we have to stick together. Don't you agree? My father nodded beside her, his eyes scanning the entryway as though trying to picture someone else living there. It's been hard on your sister. She's had a tough time lately. We were hoping you could help. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Help how? That was when my mother finally said it outright. Megan needs a fresh start. You have this house all to yourself. It would mean so much if you let her stay here for a while, just until she gets back on her feet. Her request sat between us like a stone. They weren't here to make amends. They weren't here to admit the damage they had caused. They wanted me to hand over the very thing they had once tried to take, now dressed up as charity and sisterly love. I stayed quiet long enough that my father stepped in again. Think of it as sharing your blessings. You've done well for yourself. She deserves a chance too. Isn't that what family does, support each other? I looked from one face to the other. The same faces that had turned cold when I drew my line, the same voices that had declared me dead to them. Now those voices spoke of unity, of sacrifice. But not once did I hear the words I needed most: apology, regret, acknowledgement. Finally, I answered, my voice calm but firm. I built this without you. Every wall, every corner, every detail, you had no part in it. And I will never sacrifice it for you, or for her. My mother's expression hardened immediately, the softness gone like it had never existed. You're making a mistake, Emily. You'll regret pushing your family away. I shook my head. No. What I regret is ever believing you'd treat me as equal. But those days are over. This house is my line in the sand. Cross it again, and you won't be welcome at all. The silence stretched, broken only by the shuffle of my father's shoes as he turned back toward the car. My mother lingered a moment longer, her eyes narrowing with the same disdain I'd seen my whole life, then followed him down the path. When the door closed behind them, I didn't feel guilt or fear, only peace. I had spoken the truth they could never twist. Their pleas meant nothing, because my silence from now on would be the loudest answer they'd ever receive. Time passed, and with it, the distance between me and my family grew wider. But instead of emptiness, I found something unexpected: peace. My days were filled with work I actually enjoyed, evenings in a home that reflected my own choices, mornings where I woke up without dread pressing on my chest. The independence I once feared I'd never have had become my strength. The house that my parents once dismissed as better suited for Megan had become a reflection of everything they said I wasn't capable of. I planted flowers that bloomed bright in spring, fixed up the backyard into a space where I could finally breathe, and even turned one spare room into a studio for the writing I'd always wanted to pursue. Each change was mine alone, untouched by their expectations. From the sidelines, I still caught whispers about their world unraveling. Megan was still at home, drifting through days without purpose. Job applications went nowhere, and her once bright confidence had dulled. The people who had poured every resource into her were now weighed down by debt, forced to live with the fallout of their choices. And Megan? The resentment was clear. She had been promised everything, spoon-fed a future where success was guaranteed. But instead of stepping into that dream, she had been left holding the pieces of it, bitter and restless. She blamed me, of course. To her, I was the obstacle, the sister who refused to hand over the last thing she thought she was owed. But deep down, I think she knew the truth. It wasn't me who ruined her life. It was the blind favoritism that crippled her before she ever had to stand on her own. As for my parents, they rarely tried to reach out anymore. When they did, it wasn't with affection or reconciliation. It was with veiled comments about family obligations or subtle hints that Megan needed a break from living at home. I never entertained the thought. Their control had defined my childhood, their betrayal had marked my early adulthood, but their downfall belonged entirely to them. I refused to carry it. I built my life from scraps, from double shifts and lonely nights, from determination they never saw in me. And in the end, I was the one who stood tall, while the pedestal they built for my sister crumbled beneath her. Sometimes I sit in the living room, the walls painted in colors I chose, the shelves lined with books I bought myself, and I think about everything it took to get here. My parents gambled my future away to secure hers, and it destroyed them both. I close this story with the truth they never wanted me to see. They planned my sister's future using my life as collateral. But when I chose myself, I finally won. Do you think I made the right choice by cutting them off, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories.